All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. As many of you are still joining, we'll go ahead and start very slowly. Welcome to this fourth edition of the Pass the Mic webinar series. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Pass the Mic series is, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, essentially Pass the Mic series is a webinar series we do every month or 2 months, where we invite some of our good friends and industry experts to answer some of your questions and talk about topics that interest you. So anything that has to do with the Microsoft 365 and SharePoint space. Yeah, so you can keep learning every day. Yeah, so before we start, I introduce our speaker. I guess I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Laurent Saint-Pierre. I'm Community Enablement Manager here at ShareGate. My name is Laurent, but everybody calls me Larry. Yeah, and for the a little public service announcement before we start, the webinar will be recorded, so you will receive a recorded version of the webinar after the event. So keep an eye open for your in your emails. We will be taking questions, so go ahead by all means. Ask your questions in the Q&A section. We'll try to take a few breaks during the presentation if we can to ask Susan a few questions. If we can't do that, we'll make sure to keep some time at the end of the presentation to do a proper Q&A with Susan. And I think that's pretty much it. If you stick around for the whole presentation, at the end, we'll have a little leave behind that we will share with you, a little something that Sue prepared for you, a little checklist of sorts that you can use to apply everything you learned during the presentation. So I think that is it in terms of our little announcements. And I think we're ready. I think we've got a session packed with information, so I guess we want to get started. And yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Susan Hanley, very good friend of ours. So longtime MVP, been in the community, very involved for a long time, and we're really, really glad to have her with us. I'll let Susan introduce herself. So how are you doing this this morning, Susan? Oh, I think we've got you muted still.
All right, hopefully you can hear me now.
We hear you now.
Thanks. Doing a little better. I am in day 6 of after having escaped COVID for 2.5 years. I am now in day 6. Yeah, good thing this isn't in person.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. And we're participating in a conference right now. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. So the ShareGate team is on the road right now, but we wanted to make sure we rendered a little rework. That we didn't want to miss this. We want to still put this together for all of you here joining us. So yeah, Susan, I'll let you introduce yourself. I guess we can start with the presentation after that. I might jump in here and there during the presentation to ask some questions. I know that there's already a lot of them coming through, so we'll do our best to answer as many as them as possible. If we don't have the time, what we try to do sometimes is try to do a recap and like FAQ document that we send also after the presentation. So don't be shy, ask your questions. So yeah, Susan, the floor is yours. I'll let you get started.
Thanks. So thanks, Larry. Thanks so much for having me. And as Larry said, my name is Sue Hanley. I'm a Microsoft MVP based on the East Coast of the United States in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. Most of the time, I spend my time helping organizations make great intranets. I pretty much focus on the people side of technology deployments. I'm an information architect and business analyst. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially over the last 2 years when people deployed Teams really quickly in response to the pandemic, is that I have an awful lot of clients that have been using SharePoint for a really long time, and they're steeped in SharePoint traditions, and making the transition to Teams has not always been so easy for them. And so today I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned that you can share with your users if now maybe you need to go back and say, all right, we put Teams out there, let's see what happened. And so just to get started, I will make a shameless plug for a little ebook that Mark Cashman and I wrote with the help of Rebecca Jackson, who did our beautiful illustrations. But SharePoint's been around for a really long time. In fact, about 21 years. And having worked with clients for that long, basically focused on deploying SharePoint successfully, what happened early in 2020, many of our previous SharePoint users, whether they were on premises or in the cloud, raced to deploy Teams so that people could do meetings and chat and get work done while they were working from home. But in many cases, the connection between Teams and SharePoint was never clearly explained. In fact, many of my clients were actually told to ignore the Files tab in their Teams, not realizing that simply by creating a team, a capital T team, it's already too late. I mean, you have a SharePoint site, but without providing their users with the guidance that they needed to help make that transition, with the great intention of making it easy for people to work from anywhere, instead, things got a teeny bit more complicated. If you had never used SharePoint, if you were what I'd call a Teams first organization, it's actually less confusing. But if you've been using SharePoint and then rapidly deployed Teams, you may have thought that you were enabling this work from anywhere scenario and a one-stop shop for teamwork with chat and meetings and collaboration all in one place. But what you may have ended up with is this total confusion. I wish I had $1 for every time I was asked, should I put things in SharePoint or should I put it in Teams? Because now people are basically confused. Where do I put things? Where do I find things? And while we want everyone to be able to take advantage of the great features of Teams, one place to find all your work, if our little t teams already had a SharePoint site, when we launched Microsoft Teams, we might have some issues. And the challenge, I think, for many users today is, where do I find everything? Just where is the content that I want to be working with? And so rather than talking about how bad our mistakes were, let's talk about what we need to do now. Or if we're just starting out with the collaboration features of Teams, what we should be doing. And so this is really what I want to talk about today, sort of how I work through these issues with the people that I'm trying to help sort of make this connection between what should we be doing, where should we be storing our files, and just how should we get started or restarted in the deployment of Teams. This may be a lot easier for what I call Teams first organizations if you've never had SharePoint, but because for these users, aligning existing SharePoint content is really a secondary focus. But if you are a SharePoint first organization and your teams have already been using SharePoint, it's really important to explain that Teams and SharePoint connection. And that is that there's no place to put files in Teams. In fact, when we add a library to Teams, or when we add a file to Teams, it is actually being stored in the corresponding SharePoint site in the default document library. Now, you probably know this, but maybe your users don't, which is why they often ask, should I put my files in Teams or in SharePoint? Now, as I like to say, SharePoint lives behind the scenes, kind of in the backstage of every team. And what we need to do as IT professionals is make sure that we explain that connection to our Teams users who also understand or have had some understanding of SharePoint. So if we haven't totally confused everybody yet, you can see why there is a problem, because we have Teams, we have SharePoint, and what we really need to do is explain that connection. So here is one of the ways that I try to do that. So what I basically try to explain is that a Teams channel corresponds more or less to a SharePoint folder. So we have a team, and that is going to give us a SharePoint site. So a parent site. So each team gets sort of one main SharePoint site. When we create a channel in that team, that's going to give us a folder in the document library that comes by default with our SharePoint site. Now, we can have additional document libraries. There's absolutely no reason that we can't do everything we're used to doing in that back-end SharePoint site for that team. But if all you're looking at is the experience from Teams right when you create a team, the connection is really there's a document library that comes with every SharePoint site. Behind the scenes, it's called shared documents, or as I like to call it, shared %20 documents. You get a channel, you get a folder in that library for every channel that you create. So if you've been living under the assumption that folders are evil and you must organize all of your content in SharePoint with metadata, get over it, because every Teams channel is going to create a corresponding folder in that default document library. When you click on the Files tab in that channel, what you're actually doing is loading files into that folder inside the default document library. So every channel gets a folder. If you create a private channel, however, you get an entirely new SharePoint site. And that is a connection that many people don't quite understand. That SharePoint site has a membership group that is wholly contained by the people who have access to the private channel. And in order to have a private channel, you first have to be a member of the team. And if you've been paying attention to what's in the latest releases from Microsoft, if you create something called a shared channel using the capability to share a channel across multiple organizations in a feature called Teams Connect, also called Teams Connect, you are actually going to get yet another SharePoint site managed by the host tenant. And in the case of a shared channel, you actually don't have to be a member of the team that is hosting the channel in order to be a member of that SharePoint site. So another way to, sorry, yeah.
Little question, Sue.
Sure.
Someone was asking, shouldn't we avoid using folders? So I don't know if that's like a concept that's somewhat,
yeah. So as I said earlier,
around,
for longtime SharePoint users, there has been a proliferation by consultants, probably just like me, who have basically tried to explain that folders are the F word in Microsoft Teams and that they're evil. We should never use them. That's, that's just it's a concept that isn't going to work for the long term. It never really worked. It's a metaphor that our users totally understand. And what we really don't want to do in any library is have nested folders. I like to say one level of nesting is fine, and at 2 levels of nesting, there's a very sick kitten in the world. If you have 3 levels of nested folder, you've probably killed a kitten. So if you would like to preserve the kittens of the world, I would say limit your nesting of folders, but it is totally fine to organize your content using a metaphor that we have been using for a gazillion years and that everybody understands. And oh, by the way, you do not have a choice. When you are deploying Teams, you are getting folders. So this is one of those kind of capabilities that I basically like to say is get over it. They're not evil. You just need to use them wisely. So, and I will talk a little bit about if you will also want to use metadata, there is a way to make that metadata editable in Teams, but by default, Teams is really folder based because of the concept, the relationship between the Teams channel and SharePoint. And so this is really important for you to explain to your users and to emphasize that folders are not this evil construct that we've been propagating for many years. So one of the things I just want to take a little bit of a step back and explain before we go too deep, that I want to do a little terminology check. And when we talk about Microsoft Teams, what we're really talking about is team collaboration. And that's what's supported by Microsoft Teams. And at the back end, SharePoint team site, something that we call a team site, which is a SharePoint site where the security is managed by a Microsoft 365 group. And when you create a team, you get a team site at the back end. When you are building your intranet, however, you will not be using team sites. You will be using what we call communication sites. Communication sites are designed for a small number of editors and a large number of readers. Think your intranet. What's different about a team site is that you're really kind of on the team or you're not. There's really kind of only two permissions. I'm an owner or I'm a member. You're either in or you're out. And with a team, everyone can edit everything. With a communication site, the idea is that we're communicating information where most people are going to just be readers of the information. And if we want to connect all of the kind of sites we have in SharePoint together to tell a story, this is the entire scope of a different presentation. That's where we're going to use hubs, which allow us to connect sites together, not the front end part of Microsoft Teams. So what's really important to know is that when we're creating a team, the kind of SharePoint site we're getting is a team site. Now you can, sorry.
Yeah, quick one for you. There's
Sure.
a little question that it's a simple question I think we can answer. It already came up a few times in the Q&A. It's what's the difference between the little t teams and the capital T teams? So
I use the big T teams to refer to Microsoft Teams, the product. I use little t team to mean either people working together, you know, like the English word that means people working together, or to refer to the team site that lives behind the teams. You know, Microsoft took a perfectly good English word and made a product out of it. And so now we have to be very careful about what are we talking about when we use the T word, because we don't know if we mean the product, the team, the people who are working together, or the back-end SharePoint team site that is hosting all of our files and pages and links and everything else.
Thanks for clarifying.
Sure. Thanks for asking. All right. So you can start your SharePoint to Teams journey from 3 different places, and I want to talk a little bit about each one. You could be on-prem with classic sites. You could be in the cloud with classic sites. I'm working with a very large organization right now that basically lifted and shifted their classic on-prem intranet and team collaboration solution, moved it to the cloud, but everybody's classic. And so they are still still massively confused because now they have SharePoint sites that live behind teams that they've created, and then classic SharePoint team sites that are also in the cloud and unfortunately created for the same organization, which is why people just don't know, do I put things in SharePoint or Teams? And then finally, you could be in the cloud with modern SharePoint sites, modern sites backed by Microsoft 365 groups, but you haven't yet teamified those sites. So if you have created modern team sites prior to the deployment of Microsoft Teams, you actually are already in a pretty good position to teamify, but you still have to do a little work to get there. No matter where you are to start, when you introduce a new way of working, you are going to basically be moving people's cheese. And no one likes to be told you can't do what you are doing, or, your baby's ugly, you need to redo everything. And so what's really important to understand is that you are going to need to sort of orient people's perspectives to understand the differences, the similarities, and the integration, and how you can kind of bring those experiences together. When you go to a SharePoint site, the front door is a page. When you go to a team, the front door right now are the chat messages associated with the channel that you are in. And that is a very different experience. And so, as I said, if you are teamifying from an existing SharePoint site and have additional libraries besides the default shared documents library, you're going to need to figure out how to bring that content into Teams so that people can basically work in Teams and still take advantage of all of the features they know and love in SharePoint. The challenge may be that you may already have folders in your default document library. And when you bring that content into Teams, you're now going to have to figure out how to expose that content to your Teams users. So no matter where you're starting from, I think the best way to get thinking about working in Teams is to start to think about some additional, about the channels that you're going to need. It is possible that not every channel or folder that you have on your existing SharePoint site needs to be a channel. And channels are primarily about conversation, whereas your folders may be in SharePoint legacy, your legacy SharePoint folders may be about file organization. And what you want to do is work with your team to start thinking about how will we make the connection between the topics that we talk about as a team and the files that are associated with those topics. You also need to agree as a team what we're going to call the channels that we create. One important tip is that channels are always displayed in alphabetical order. If you would like them to be, and with general as the first channel, and you can't change it and you can't change the name. If you want to make sure that your channels show up in a particular order, then you want to name your channel with leading zeros, or even I've seen people do this with alphabet as well. Important if you're going to use leading numbers to use 2 digits, because you want to make sure that 01 sorts before 10, which is 10. And so I usually recommend numbers because I think it makes more sense to most people. And you also need to decide as a team what's in the general channel, because general is kind of we couldn't figure out where to put things, what else should go there. And a couple of things I think are really helpful to put there is a page for new team member onboarding. I'm working with a client right now. We just met last week, and it was really interesting. She had a channel for new employees, but really hadn't created an experience to sort of package all that up. All new employees on her team was sort of a list of files in the Files tab, not in any order, without any context. And what we did in about 10 minutes is I showed her how to create a page on the SharePoint site, put those files in context on the page with some text before the file link to explain, look at this first, here's what you're going to find here, here are some things to think about, and then packaging up related links on that SharePoint page to help welcome new employees. And then we added that page literally in one click to the general channel, and now new employees are directed there, and they will find what they need to get started, not just with files, but with context as well. And that's one of the benefits that SharePoint pages have over just a dump of files. Pages allow you to tell a story and put context around what people are consuming in files. And it's very helpful often to create a page to tell that story and showcase the files that people need, if the content actually even needs to be in a file, in the context of that page. So we as a team need to decide how are we going to use the general channel. The next thing we're going to want to do is look at our current files, especially the ones in that default library in our existing SharePoint team site, and clean up what we're not using. One of the best pieces of advice that I can give to everybody using SharePoint and Teams is that governance is your friend. Search is incredible. And one of the challenges with search is it's going to find everything, including all of those files that are no longer relevant. One of the things that every team needs to agree to is what should we be doing to name our files to take advantage of versioning so we don't get lots and lots of files that are simply versions of the same asset, or what should we do when a file is no longer relevant? Can we delete it? Does it need to be preserved as a record? We need to think through these things. Usually, team collaboration spaces are not a place for records. So if a file is no longer relevant, get rid of it. Remove the clutter. Do some cleaning, especially before we're going to Teamify. And so if you have not yet created a team to go with your SharePoint site, I recommend that you clean before you up-level your site. Take a look at the topics, work with your team to decide sort of how do we structure our work. And what we want to think about is how can we map the existing content in SharePoint to the structures of Teams. And if you have not been using folders to organize your content in SharePoint, you now might want to think about, can we introduce folders as an organizational principle? Because whether we like it or not, we're going to get them when we add a team to our existing SharePoint site. So you're going to look at that content, think about your initial channels, and then decide how the content that you have in SharePoint already maps to the channels that you want to create in Team. You want to make sure that all of the folders in your document library are mapped to some channel. And while you can have non-channel folders, I would ask you to think very carefully about, should we do that? And if content really doesn't map to a channel, should we move it to another library and then expose it as a tab in Teams? And that is a helpful tip. If you would like to have additional libraries besides that default one, you can add that library as a tab in any channel where it makes sense. And so that is something you definitely want to think about. So one tip is that you actually want to use the SharePoint library app, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. And why do I want you to use that? Because this is the app that will preserve all of your views and allow you to access and edit your metadata inside Teams. What I don't recommend using is the document library app when you are trying to add a SharePoint library to a team. So even though you can add the SharePoint app and then select the library from that SharePoint site that you want, and you'll be much happier, I promise. All right, so let's talk about how are we going to get from SharePoint to Teams. If you're in the cloud already, then you're really very, very close. And what you can do, if you are the site owner, is you can effectively Teamify your site. And there's two ways to do it. If you see the little add real-time chat in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you can click it, and that will put a team in front of your site. It will, by the way, add a general folder to your document library. So if you've cleaned everything up and thought about how you're going to map everything, this won't be a shock and it won't be a surprise to you. If you don't see this little button, look for the megaphone in the upper left-hand corner of your SharePoint site, and then scroll down until you see Add Real-Time Chat. If you don't see this, it's probably because you're not the site owner. Only the site owner has the option to add a team to an existing site. So when you Teamify, a little wizard will pop up to guide you through the decisions that you need to make. In general, I would recommend that if you've carefully curated your homepage, then I would add the homepage of your site as a tab in the general channel for team. You should absolutely add any existing lists that you have as tabs in your team. And what I don't think you should do, even though I don't even know why Microsoft is prompting you for this, do not pin the style library or site assets library to a channel in Teams. Yes to almost everything else, but not those libraries. If you're in the cloud and you have classic team sites, then your steps are a little bit different. In this case, the first thing you're going to want to do is add a Microsoft 365 group to that classic site. And then once you've groupified, you can then Teamify. And so Microsoft has great documentation to help you do this, and things are going to change a little bit. And the group owners are now going to be the site collection admins. They'll also be added to the owners group for the team. And you're going to want to probably take a look and do a little cleanup of your content. But if you're already in the cloud, the most important thing is that you first want to make sure that you do not have any of the dreaded S word, subsites, in your team, because while you absolutely can Groupify and Teamify a site that has subsites, you don't get all the benefits. Those subsites are going to have none of the benefits of being part of a team. So in general, you want to flatten out your architecture before you Teamify or Groupify. If you are on-prem, you probably have subsites. And for you, I totally recommend flatten out your architecture, and then migrate to the cloud. So as you, or in the process of migration, you are going to want to make sure that each subsite, if it needs to exist, is promoted to be its own Microsoft team. Larry, do you have any tools that might help people if they're migrating or up-leveling their subsites?
Geez, I don't know. It's a really good question. Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, definitely that's something ShareGate can help with. I mean, it's something we were able to help with for a long time. Just using the migration module, there were ways to play around with it to play with your site hierarchy. But as that was becoming more and more of a challenge for a lot of people for exactly the use case that you're talking right now, so switching and wanted to have more of like a flat hierarchy and use all the functionalities that you're talking about, that was coming up a lot. So we kind of reworked the interface of the product to make it more intuitive for users to actually be able to go through that process. Because initially the tool was built for migrating from one site to the other, but now we kind of like reshape the new experience in order to help teams do that. So yeah, definitely a long answer to a simple question. Definitely ShareGate can help out with that.
So another place I think that you guys can also help is, first of all, you want to think about you as the site owner. I would start by creating the channels that you need in Teams. And then what you're going to want to do is move your content from your existing folders or libraries into the corresponding channels. You can absolutely do that yourself using the move capability. And I think it's really important that you use move, not copy, when you're re-architecting your content, or you can use a tool like ShareGate to move your content, preserve all of your dates and file name and metadata as you're migrating the content. But I prefer that we sort of think about the channels that we need in Teams. Now we're going to get these special Teamified folders. And when we create that channel in Teams, there'll be a corresponding folder in the SharePoint site. And then we can go to the SharePoint site and move our content from wherever it was into that corresponding folder that Teams has created for us. Once we start working in Teams, there is a new capability rolling out now where if we rename a channel, it will automatically rename the corresponding channel in SharePoint. So once you're in Teams, you really want to manage those experiences from the Teams interface. If you have content that doesn't map to a channel, then I would recommend that you consider creating a unique or a new document library and then adding that library as a tab in the appropriate channel. So other things that you want to think about is sort of, I think I had already mentioned this, add the home page of your existing team site to the general channel. Think about maybe if you had been using SharePoint News, if your site was modern and you were using News, you can create a tab for News. There's no reason that you have to discontinue those kind of capabilities. If you had a classic site and you were using announcements, forget it. You're going to now switch to creating SharePoint pages to tell your story. Announcements are boring, not very rich, backed by a classic SharePoint list. If you really want to have rich and engaging experiences in news, you'll want to recreate or start creating team news using SharePoint pages. I love to create a team, a page in SharePoint that describes who's on the team, and then I will add that to the general tab in Teams. What's really great about making that page in SharePoint is you can use the people web part, which means each person's contact information is already there and up to date along with their photo, and you don't have to do anything magical to keep that current, but it gives you a nice way, again, to showcase who's on our team, quickly, send them a message or a chat from that page, or just chat with them in Teams as we would otherwise. Definitely want to make sure that all lists are added as tabs. And as I said earlier, if you're not seeing it yet, you should see it this month that when you rename a channel in Teams, the corresponding SharePoint folder will also be renamed. Now, this is only going to happen for Teams channels that are renamed after the feature is rolled out. If you have previous channels that you named earlier, there's that connection is not going to be made for you. If you rename a channel in Teams, the SharePoint folder is not renamed. However, if you manually make the name of the folder the exact same name as the channel name, they will sync. Teams will recognize that, oh, these are my files, and they match up. A few little tips if you were previously syncing to OneDrive. The number one question that I get when people are sort of thinking through sort of this whole SharePoint to Teams process is, do I need a new team or should I create a channel in a team? And as a good consultant, I have a two-word answer to every question. Of course, the answer is it depends, but I think there are some sort of general principles that you can follow. One of the things I've noticed is that if you have a request process to get a new team, and IT does not quickly respond to those requests, very often people are not asking for new teams when they really should have a brand new team. So the obvious answer is, if I'm working on a new initiative with different people, you want a different team, even if it means submitting a ticket to get that team created. If you're working on a new initiative with the same people, you have a choice to make. Do I create a channel in the existing team, or do I create a new team? And I think it really depends on how extensive that initiative is and whether you want to be able to group and organize your conversations associated with that project in their own collection of topic-based channels, because you only get one topic in a channel. And so if it's a brand new initiative and you want to organize your conversations and your files, then you probably want a new team, even if it's the same people. Otherwise, you could use a channel within a team if it's really not a big thing. If you want to focus conversations on a specific topic, but it's the same team and it's really a subsidiary, or it's a topic very much related to the reason you created the team to begin with, that's probably a new channel in the same team. Important to note that a channel, by default, everyone on the team has access to that content, and we're really just creating that channel to focus conversations and files on a particular topic. If, however, you want that content to be private to just selected members of the team, for example, the leadership team, I can kind of go either way on this, new team versus new channel, and you really just need to decide how you want to do this. But if you just want to focus the conversation with a small group of people who are already on the team, you can create a private channel. In order to be part of a private channel, you have to be a member of the main team. So this is really designed to help create little private rooms within your big team collaboration space. And then finally, rolling out right now and available in general availability is the ability to create a collaboration space in my tenant that appears to you in your tenant as if it is in your tenant. In other words, to avoid tenant switching when you want to collaborate with an external organization. In order to do this, there's a number of setup steps, and this is as a product, this is called Teams Connect, and that type of channel is called a shared channel, shared between multiple organizations or even within the same organization within multiple teams. What this would allow you to do inside your organization is you could have a channel inside Team A that inside Teams B looks as if it's a channel in Team B, but it is actually hosted by A. It just appears in the channel list for B. So Team B working along can actually collaborate with Team A without switching teams inside the place where they're doing most of their work. And that same experience happens if it's a separate organization.
I was about to ask you that question. That's one of the questions that was coming up frequently in the Q&A. Like, can you expand a little bit more on the shared channels? Yeah.
Yep, so, and I have a slide on that in
perfect.
One more slide. So,
all right.
Just to sort of explain a little bit more about private channels, what's really significant or what's important to know about private channels is that you have to be a member of the team in order to be in the private channel. You can absolutely add guests to a private channel as long as they are members of the team. you can have only 30 private channels per team. And this is where some organizations, some that I've been working with, have gotten into trouble because they've created private channels because they didn't want to go through the hassle of provisioning a new team. And so they started to create private channels and then ran out. So provisioning and organizations, you need to think about as an organization is how are we going to provision teams? What is the process? And how can we make sure that we make it as easy as possible for people to create the right kind of collaboration space so that we don't end up with teams that have private channels that realize, oh my gosh, we've run out. And now we have to take that content and up-level it to its own team and potentially lose some of that chat history when we migrate. Larry, I know that ShareGate can help you migrate a private channel to make its own team, but I think there's some limitations on the number of chat messages that will migrate for you. Is that still true?
I think it is, and maybe Charles can correct me here. I know he's helping us in the production here. I'm not sure of the exact limitation for that, but yeah, depending on using the APIs from Microsoft, there are some limitations there. So we are limited in some fashion, but I can't remember exactly what the
I think it used to be 50 messages, but I think here's the important thing. You need to do that planning step that I talked about earlier before you run into this problem. And often that planning step will will help you sort of identify where you need to have conversations with IT about how are we governing the provisioning of Microsoft Teams. And I think that's really an important conversation you need to have as an organization so that you don't end up with private channels that really should be private teams. And so one other important thing to note about a private channel is that you can't have a channel meeting in a private team, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So shared channels, as I said, here's a little Giphy to sort of take a look at sort of what happens when you have a shared channel. One important thing to note is that shared channels are don't magically happen. The two organizations that are agreeing to participate in a shared channel have to set up a relationship. The admins of each tenant need to set up a relationship. And once that relationship has been set up, you will be able to create shared channels to collaborate with that organization. That's available now. There's some guidance, really great guidance about how to do it, and that I've shared in a link in the slide deck. So one of my favorite features about Teams, and probably the reason we deployed it to begin with, is that Teams is really, the best thing about Teams is it's a great way to have a meeting. And it's a great way to have a virtual meeting. And there's basically two kinds of meetings in Teams. Meetings that you can have in a channel, and those are basically designed to be inclusive meetings. And when you create a channel meeting, anyone who sees that meeting can join it if they want. You have to schedule these from Microsoft Teams, and they show up in the calendar for the channel in which they are created. If you don't specifically make a person as required when you create a channel meeting, they are not going to get an invitation in Outlook. Guests, however, whether they want it or not, are always going to get an invitation for a channel meeting. So I'm a guest in several teams, and I often get meeting invitations, channel meeting invitations that they're completely not interesting, relevant, not saying not interesting, but not relevant to me. One of the nice things, you can add a channel meeting to your personal calendar, even if you are not explicitly invited. But if you want to make sure that someone gets a channel meeting invitation, then add them as required when you create the meeting invitation. Chat, transcript, meeting recordings are available for people who are not available for people who are not members of the team. However, when you record a channel meeting, it's really nice because the recording is automatically stored in the files for that channel and in a folder called meetings. And so anyone who was not at the meeting will be able to see that recording easily. it's in a folder called recordings. And who can see the recording? Basically, if you're a member of the team, you can see that recording. So super handy, you don't have to worry about it. When you record a meeting, a regular meeting, the recording is going to land in the OneDrive of the person who pressed record. And oftentimes the follow-up step actually is to move that meeting recording to someplace in your team if you want the rest of the team to be able to see those watch that recording. A regular meeting, you can also have a standard meeting and that you basically host for your team. Only invited members can participate. You can schedule a standard meeting from Teams or Outlook. This is really just the kind of meeting that you're used to. Chat, transcript, recording are available to the attendees by default, but not people who were not invited to the meeting. And as I said, the recording lands in the personal OneDrive for the person who starts the recording. Limited number of people can see the recording. Standard meetings are by definition private, so you may actually not want to move that recording to a place where anyone can see it, or maybe you do. Maybe after the fact it's okay, even if I wasn't invited to the meeting, I can see the recording. But like any private meeting, only the organizer and the people explicitly invited know about that meetings. And because it's really not part of the team, it's not going to show up in the channel calendar. So meeting recordings, by the way, now are default. They used to be the default storage for meeting recordings was 60 days when Microsoft first announced that they were going to automatically delete meeting recordings after a certain period of time. I believe that is now 120 days, but if you want to preserve a meeting recording longer, you can. One of the other sort of features that we want to make sure that we talk about to our users is to help them with that transition is to basically say, you know, if you start in Teams, we'll bring SharePoint to you. So we can bring the home page of the existing SharePoint site to you in your team so that you can actually start from Teams and see all the content that you need from that legacy SharePoint site. What's important to note, however, is that the site navigation is not displayed when you bring a page into Teams. So one of the things I often do is I add critical elements of the SharePoint navigation on the home page so that when I bring that page into Teams, all those navigation links are still there. Another way to help people with that transition from SharePoint to Teams is to help them know how to get back and forth. And this has been around for a really long time, but literally about 3 weeks ago, one of my clients asked, well, how do you do that? And he's been using Teams forever. So Teams connected sites, if you are in SharePoint, that you'll know that you are connected to a team because you will see the little Teams logo. And if you click it, it'll take you to that team. If you're in a channel connected folders allow you to, in SharePoint, allow you to get to the channel, and then channel connected file, the files tab in Teams allows you to open that file tab directly in SharePoint. So you can go back and forth in whatever way makes sense to you. Again, as a team, we want to have a conversation about how we want to name our files and organize our files. But if somebody wants to spend their day in Teams and someone else wants to access files from SharePoint, that's okay. It's the same exact files, the same exact place. The other thing you actually can teach people about is that we now actually, if you are in SharePoint, you can discover your files in channels and in the site library. And without having to go to site contents, this is an amazing feature. You can actually, in any SharePoint site, if you're in one document library, find all the other document libraries by clicking this little icon that looks like a bunch of books wherever you are, in whichever library you're in. The other thing, if you have been using metadata in your team, the Files tab will show you the metadata, but not let you edit it. So if you want to edit the metadata from within Teams on your legacy SharePoint site, add the document library using the SharePoint app, and then magically you will be able to get the little eye icon and then edit all of your metadata and access sort of page details and edit all the metadata directly from within Teams. Another thing we can do as we're helping people make that transition is explain what happens when you attach a file in chat. If you attach a file to a one-to-one chat, it's going to land in your OneDrive. That is where, if you're sending it to me, that's where I'm going to be accessing that file from, your OneDrive. If I'm in a group chat and you attach a file, it'll also land in your OneDrive. However, when you attach a file in a Teams chat or Teams channel, that file is going to get stored in the corresponding SharePoint library for the Teams channel. And so when you're trying to help people, like, where is that file? This is important that they understand. And by the way, that OneDrive experience, if you go to OneDrive online, is the magical file finder for anything in the ecosystem. When you're in OneDrive, you have access to all of your files, whether they are in communication sites, your personal OneDrive libraries, or your shared libraries in OneDrive in Microsoft Teams. So if you're looking for a file and don't know where to look, I would say don't bother. Start from OneDrive and you'll be able to find any of your files. So I think OneDrive is really magical. And whenever I'm having trouble finding something, I have to remind myself, oh yeah, go to OneDrive online and you will find that file right away. As I said earlier, it's okay to use folders. You can basically get over this. You can't use folders in SharePoint nonsense. You absolutely can. It's really nested folders that are going to get you into trouble. So try not to use more than 1 or 2 levels of folders. If you are a OneNote user, when you create a new channel, get rid of the Wiki tab. I am not a big fan of the Wiki tab. One of the challenges with it is if you use it and then delete the content is basically deleted on the spot with no way to recover the data. And so you're making it very easy to wipe out your knowledge base when you use the Wiki tab. OneNote acts very similar to that. In fact, I couldn't live without OneNote. What I would recommend is that you add the team OneNote. That again, you're going to get that a OneNote automatically will be created for you when you provision a Microsoft team. Add a tab in the general channel for that OneNote and use that for your wiki type content.
There was a question about that, Susan. Someone asking, can we get Microsoft to stop adding the wiki by default?
Oh my God. Put that in the feedback. I mean, I will totally plus 1,000 on that. I would just like to kill the wiki tab. Honestly, even folks at Microsoft recommend killing it when you provision a channel. So yes, yeah. Team, get rid of the wiki here.
It's not possible, but we all hope it would.
Yes. So yeah, not possible today, but man, if enough people say we really don't like it, let's go for it. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up and leave time for questions, I think a couple of things to get started. Look at your team sites in SharePoint that don't have a connected team. See if there is already a team that goes with that particular site. What I've noticed is that very often all of the disconnected team sites in SharePoint already have a Microsoft team, which means that work group has 2 places to put files. So we know they're confused. And so what we really need to do is help make that connection. If there is a team, we want to move those legacy files into the modern site that's associated with the team and then delete the legacy site. One place to find all of our work. If we want to Teamify an existing a modern team site, we want to do some planning. And first, we're going to have to groupify that site or classic site, and then we can Teamify. If you're on-prem, you really want to do some planning before you start deploying teams. If you didn't and already did it, you have the same issues. You want to look for scenarios where you have an on-prem team that already has a cloud-based Microsoft team and migrate that content into the cloud-based team, cleaning it up along the way, and then killing that legacy on-prem team. And most importantly, help your users understand the connections between Teams and SharePoint. Give them the vocabulary that they need to make that connection. And I think when you do that, you can have everybody live happily in Teams. So Teams will be where we start our day, where we have our conversations, and we get access to all of the files that we're working with on a regular basis. So that's all I had. Here's all the various ways to get in touch with me. I'll leave that up for a second. And yeah, I think we can take some Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that. So many questions before I jump in the Q&A. There were so many questions, so I was having a hard time following the questions and your presentation at the same time. So if I ask a question you already answered, just let me know. I'll switch on to the next one. And okay. Also, apparently, we had a sneaky Benjamin Nyland who was actually attending the webinar, and he let me know, I wasn't even aware of this, that ShareGate is working on a provisioning solution for Teams, and that feature will automatically remove the Wiki. So worth mentioning.
God bless Ben. Yeah, thank you, Benjamin.
All right, so I have a few questions. So one of the things that came up a lot was, so a lot of people seem to be a little bit surprised by the whole nesting of folders. So people were asking a little bit, what are the reasons why you want to avoid nesting your folders too much? And some people saying that, just expand the question. So if we didn't organize it in this way, how would we organize the files via Teams? One level of folders only viewed through Teams would be a nightmare. So I don't know if you have like a little bit more.
So I'm not saying you can only have one level of folders. I think you can go to 2 or 3. Nesting folders is a problem because have you ever tried finding something in nesting folders? It's a horrible findability strategy. And if you have long names for your folders and then long names for your files, the path to get to your folder could exceed the ability to create a link to that file. So one of the reasons we want to stop nesting folders is to make it easier for people to find content. That's the reason, by the way, that we propagated the never use folders in SharePoint myth. It's not because folders are bad, and it's not because 1 or 2 levels of folders are bad. It's just that it makes content much, much harder to find. And go try to unpack someone else's folders and figure out what they were thinking. At least with the concept of a channel, we have a primary topic for at least that level 1 of folders. And so I think we want to be very careful about sort of creating multi-level deep structures in any file library, and start taking advantage of the fact that we can actually create multiple libraries to break up our content and also combine folders with metadata if that makes sense.
Totally. Perfect. Another topic that came up a lot in the questions was, again, shared channels. So I'm going to group some questions together here. For shared channels, do both companies have to be Microsoft 365 licensed users?
Yeah, I believe yes. Yeah. I think, yeah, because obviously the concept of a shared channel is Teams to Teams collaboration. So you both have to have Microsoft Teams, and it needs to be in use because otherwise, why would you want a shared channel? If you don't have that, you can invite a guest to any channel, but the concept of a shared channel is Teams to Teams.
Right, there's not much value in creating a channel with them if they're not actively working in Teams on a day-to-day basis, right? If that's not where they get their work done, they're not going to connect to Teams just to collaborate with you on that channel. Cool. And the second question around that was, are shared channels only useful for cross-tenant collaboration, or do they also provide benefits within a tenant or company? If so,
yeah, I think I talked about this, that you could use that. It's actually a nice way to cross-collaborate within your tenant as well, just to make, what it really eliminates is this idea of context switching. I'm sort of living in my one team, but I can do all the things I need to do with the people I need to do it inside that context. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, so I think that's a great question. And yes, you can.
So maybe one last question. I know you have a hard stop, Susan. So does you recommend always Teamifying from the team site level? You can also do it from the admin center as well, but I think it gives more limited options for libraries to add to the new team.
So here's why I want the team owner to do it. Teams is a place where we work together collaboratively. Our team, little t team, the work group, people with whom we work, we all have to be on the same page in order to get the best use out of Teams. I actually think before you even think about any of this is that your team, when you're storming and forming, should establish a team collaboration contract. How are we going to work together? How are we going to name our files? Will we hold each other accountable? Where are we going to store our files? What channels and folders will we use together? And we want to hold each other accountable to make sure that we're not doing things like attaching files with .v1, .v2, .final, .really final, .this time I mean it. We have to agree as a work team how we're going to work together. And when we do that, working inside Teams, making that connection to SharePoint is just so much easier because we've all discussed how we are going to get work done and how we will make that happen together. And I think that fundamentally is critically important for all team collaboration. You have to sort of start with how are we going to work together? And then I think everything can flow from there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Susan. I think that's all the time that we have for today. So I think we're coming up on like 300 questions. so apologies to many of you. Not that we didn't find your questions relevant or interesting, just for lack of time and just an incredible amount of questions. We'll try to do our best to summarize them in an FAQ document that we'll send to you after the webinar. So there's that. After that, also, my friend Amanda will share the link to the checklist that Susan put together. So look in the Q&A section, the chat section. You'll have access to the link there, so you can access that. So Sue was kind enough to prepare a little leave behind for all of you. So a little leave behind so you can remember everything that happened in the presentation and really help you guide bridging the gap between your SharePoint and your Teams. And I think we'll also add a little link to the trial for ShareGate for those of you who haven't used it yet. So if you're going through those challenges, you want to evaluate and see if that can help you either kind of assess your environment, run a little bit of reporting, and the functionalities that we talked a little bit with Sue earlier in terms of flattening your hierarchy and the whole migration aspect as well. So there's gonna be a link for you if you're interested in trying it out. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. We really appreciate it. From the comments that we're receiving right now, I think not only the ShareGate team appreciates it, I think everybody here really liked the presentation. So a huge thank you to you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Stay tuned. You can subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already, if you want to be kept in the loop for the next Pass the Mic webinars. Yeah, we hope to see you soon. Have a great rest of the day. And yeah, talk to you soon. Take care.